Hello, my name is Otto Schamer. Welcome to this website that shares with you some emerging results from an ongoing research project on Capitalism 3.0. Like probably many of you, I have been part of a generation that already at this point has experienced three major miracles. The first miracle that I experienced was the collapse of the Berlin Wall in 1989. The second miracle that I experienced was the collapse of the apartheid system a few years later. And the third miracle we all experienced when last year Barack Obama took office in the White House. Three miracles, three major events that most leading experts of the time thought would be absolutely impossible. And three times the impossible did happen. The window of opportunity opened up and suddenly kind of the tectonic plates were shifting into a new formation. Those three experiences have been pretty defining for me, for my sense who I am, and also I think for the sense of my generation, for who we are and the sorts of changes we can bring about. And yet, while these three experiences have been defining so far, I personally believe the most important miracle is yet to come. It's the fourth miracle, and it deals with the deep transformation of business and society that we are currently in the midst of. If we look at this deep transformation, what is it that we see? When we look at the surface level, we see a whole landscape of crisis situations. Food crisis, fuel crisis, financial crisis. You see the climate change crisis, the crisis of the educational system, the health system. We see a leadership crisis. We see a civilizational crisis, really. So we see all these kind of crisis situations. And the way we respond as a society is that for each of these crisis clusters, we create a ministry, we create an NGO group that's focusing on that. We have funding mechanisms. We have professional communities that deals with each of these crisis situations. Yet, what's not happening is that we look at the larger picture and that we ask the obvious questions, which is, what are the systemic root issues? What are the systemic causes that time and again recreate this whole landscape of crisis situations? And I personally believe that the most important root cause that we are dealing with here has to do with the way we think about the economy and about our economic relationships. It's our thinking about and our taken for granted assumptions for our economic relationships that I think is at issue here, and that deals with, to use a different term, with the current transformation of capitalism, with the current transformation of the economic constellation and formation that we all are part of and that we all participate in. And when we use these terms, capitalism 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, we do that because we are used at our computers that once in a while you need to update your operating system. And maybe just the same is true for our economy in our society, that once in a while we need to update the institutional intelligence based on which our economy and our society, our major social systems, are operating. And when we look back into history, capitalism 1.0, that was the free market capitalism, the laissez-faire capitalism that first developed in the late 18th and early 19th century in England and then spread around the world. And what did that do? It created phenomenal growth, but at the same time, phenomenal poverty and also environmental destruction. What did we see? The response to that was that we created, and that these societies created labor standards, we saw labor unions, we saw Federal Reserve systems, We saw kind of protectionism, kind of legislation that helped the farmers to sustain their livelihood, and so on and so forth. So we saw a number of standards, ecological, social, and financial standards that all did the same thing, which is suspending the market mechanism where it wasn't useful, where the externalities were just not acceptable for society, in order to then more in a more focused way kind of benefit from the positive sides of the market mechanism. Now that system that in Europe we call the social market economy and that in the US we call the stakeholder capitalism, that system has worked by and large well for the better part of the 20th century within the OECD countries, but hasn't really worked that well outside of these countries. And now as we move into the 21st century, we really hit upon two problems. We are hitting the wall because we are facing new challenges that we cannot address with this 2.0 capitalism setup. And the first challenge is, of course, kind of climate change and the global ecological challenges that we face, that we currently face. And the second one is that 3 to 4 billion people, so almost half, like 40% of mankind lives below the poverty line, lives on less than $2 a day. So what is it that, so, and those are the challenges that require us to once again kind of update our operating system. And the major headline kind of, and the current crisis of capitalism 2.0 is nowhere more clear than in the collapse of the negotiations in Copenhagen, at the climate change conference, or the near collapse of that. And when we look at Washington, where Wall Street is lobbying against a regulation of the banking system that would protect us, the taxpayers, from bailing out the Wall Street institutions after the next bubble will be bursting. So, and the very fact that Washington so far has, Wall Street so far has succeeded to successfully lobby against that is an example that the special interest driven, the kind of that legislation that's driven by special interest groups, which is the defining feature of capitalism 2.0, is really hitting the wall, and that we need a new system that much more kind of factors in the well-being and the health at the whole, and that as its core feature has the capacity to innovate at the scale of the whole system. So that's really the major challenge, I think, that we face as a generation, kind of to come up with these sets of institutional innovations that allow us to take democracy and that allow us to take our economic system to a higher level of operating that does allow us to innovate at the scale of the system as a whole. And what we are, so that's, I think, the challenge we are up against. The question is how? And that's what we want to investigate in this website. So we are sharing kind of based on the interviews, the round tables, the living examples, other things that we do. We share everything what we learn with you, and we invite you to share what you have been learning around these things from your own experiences, from your practical examples, and from your reflections. And together, maybe we can move a next step. And in a second introductory clip, I will outline the concepts of the 7 acupuncture points, as I happen to believe that in order to move from 2.0 to 3.0, we actually, it's not just kind of doing one thing, that we have to touch upon 7 distinct acupuncture points, 7 distinct intervention points that, if focused on kind of as an interrelated set, could help us to shift the system from 2.0 to 3.0.